Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle. This video is all about Agatha Christie, and I really wanted to fit it so that it went up during the Christie's Missing Readathon, and so that's why this isn't a Murder Mystery Monday video, but it is about mystery, so I thought it would fit. These are the next three Agatha Christie's that I read in my Agatha Christie read-through project. If you are unfamiliar, it's been a project of mine to read through all of Agatha Christie's work in chronological order of publication, and I've really been enjoying doing that. I take lots of notes. Sometimes I've read the books before, sometimes I haven't. Sometimes I've seen an adaptation and I hadn't read the book, but regardless, I make notes. If I don't know the story already, then I try to guess who the killer is. I'm also keeping my eye out for some things. First of all, I'm building a map of the Agatha Christie universe, and I find that really fascinating in this project, seeing characters cross over between series. And seeing certain characters that seem to cross over more often than other characters, that kind of thing. I also am looking for clues as to the types of investigators her different detectives are. So for example, I've been discovering that Poirot is all about truth. What's important to him when he investigates is discovering the truth, whereas with Miss Marple, it's all about justice. For her, justice is the most important thing as she investigates. For Poirot, he is all about order and method. As an investigator, he is about the psychology of the crime, the psychology of the killer. That's kind of how he investigates. Whereas Miss Marple is, she understands human nature so well that nothing surprises her, therefore she doesn't miss things that other people would miss because they just don't expect a person to behave that way. She also makes great use of her extensive knowledge of village life, and she'll quite often make comparisons. She'll tell parallel stories, you know, so if something happens, she'll say, well, this reminds me of this story in the village, and it's again all wrapped up in human nature, and that's kind of how she investigates. So this is the kind of thing I keep my eye on. So I'm going to tell you about these three books that I have read. I will briefly give a synopsis of the book and whether I liked it or not and where it is in my rankings, and then I will go into a spoiler section. But don't worry, if you haven't read the book yet, I let you know it's coming. I put spoiler across the screen, and so you can just fast forward until you don't see spoiler anymore, and then that way you won't hear anything, hopefully, that you don't want to hear. All right, so let's just dive straight in. The first one I want to talk about is The Moving Finger. This is from 1942, and it is a Miss Marple, but she doesn't make her first appearance in this story until page 135. So that's pretty far in, especially considering there are only 190 pages in this book. So it is technically a Miss Marple, but she's not the prime investigator in this book. The prime investigator is Jerry Burton. This story is narrated in the first person by Jerry. And so we have Jerry and his sister, and I have forgotten her name. That's all right. They move out to the country. He was injured in a plane crash, and he needed time to recuperate. His doctor said, why don't you guys move to the country? So they move out to this village called Limstock, and when they arrive, they find out that there has been a spate of poison pen letters going around the village, and so Jerry, he's just interested and he starts to investigate. The Moving Finger has a great opening. I have often recalled the morning when the first of the anonymous letters came. It arrived at breakfast, and I turned it over in the idle way one does when time goes slowly and every event must be spun out to its full extent. It was, I saw, a local letter with a typewritten address. I opened it before the two with London postmarks, since one of them was clearly a bill, and the other I recognized with the handwriting of one of my more tiresome cousins. It seems odd now to remember that Joanna and I were more amused by the letter than anything else. We hadn't then the faintest inkling of what was to come, the trail of blood and violence and suspicion and fear. One simply didn't associate that sort of thing with Limstock. All right. So we find out right away about the poison pen letters, and then a phrase pops up pretty close to the beginning too, that is going around the village, and that's "there's no smoke without fire," and that phrase pops up a lot in the story. And then Miss Marple does appear. When she appears, she's there as a friend of the vicar's wife, and the vicar's wife is Mrs. Dane Calthrop. That's right. Okay, so there's these anonymous letters, and then someone in the village commits suicide, it's supposed, after receiving one of these letters. So that's kind of the synopsis here of the story. Now, here's a couple quotes for you, and don't worry, they are not spoilery in any way. I haven't gotten to the spoilers section yet. Okay, so this is Mrs. Dane Calthrop. She is talking to Jerry about Miss Marple. She says, "I don't mean that kind of expert. I don't mean someone who knows about anonymous letters or even about murder. I mean someone who knows people. Don't you see? We want someone who knows a great deal about wickedness." Isn't that great? And again, is right along those lines there where I've been saying about what she's like. The other thing that I've been noticing is Agatha Christie does like to quote poetry in her books, and plays, and Shakespeare pops up a lot. Now, I only noticed Shakespeare once in this book, but I mean, he does seem to pop up quite a lot in her stories. Okay, and then here's Miss Marple. Her first appearance in the book, the Dane Calthrops had a guest staying with them, an amiable elderly lady who was knitting something with white fleecy wool. "We have very good hot scones for tea," the vicar came in and beamed placidly on us while he pursued his gentle, erudite conversation. It was very pleasant. I don't mean that we got away from the topic of murder, because we didn't. Miss Marple, the guest, was naturally thrilled by the subject. As she said apologetically, "We have so little to talk about in the country." Okay, here is another quote from Mrs. Dane Calthrop about Miss Marple. "That's my expert," said Mrs. Dane Calthrop. I don't know why I'm having a problem with that name. "Jane Marple. Look at her well. I tell you that woman knows more about the different kinds of human wickedness than anyone I've ever known." And then here's from Miss Marple herself. "One sees a good deal of human nature living in a village all the year round," said Miss Marple placidly. Then, seeming to feel it was expected of her, she laid down her crochet and delivered a gentle, old maidish dissertation on murder. Isn't that awesome? I love that quote. Okay, so let's get into some spoilers here. So I'm going to put spoiler on the screen. So if you've never read The Moving Finger and you don't want to be spoiled, fast forward until you don't see it anymore. Here's a quote. This is fairly early in the book, and it's a conversation between Burton and Mrs. Dane Calthrop about the poison pen letters. There are so many things the letters might say, but don't. That's what is so curious. Mrs. Dane Calthrop said that. "I should have thought they erred on the side of restraint," I said bitterly. "But they don't seem to know anything. None of the real things." That right there is a major clue to the author of these letters, which I thought was really interesting. And then a final quote, and this is close to the end of the book. "He couldn't bring himself to write a foul letter to the girl he loved. It's a very interesting sidelight on human nature." And that's Miss Marple. Once they've, she solved the case. So again, that one goes with the quote from the beginning that these poison pen letters that are going around the village, every once in a while they kind of hit the mark, but they were like really kind of vague things, nothing real. And the one person who didn't get a letter, that was really revealing, because Mr. Symington was in love with her. So there you have it. I enjoyed The Moving Finger. It wasn't one of my favorites, but it was interesting. And I've rated it at 24 out of the 47 that I have so far read. Let's move on to Towards Zero. This is from 1944, and it is a Superintendent Battle book. Superintendent Battle was last seen in Murder is Easy from 1938, and this is his last appearance. So Superintendent Battle is in 5 books in total, and this is the last one. There is a map in here. We don't always get a map in Agatha Christie, but I do like it when we do. And so this is a map of the area to kind of explain certain houses are across the water. Yeah. Okay, so the book opens. Towards Zero is a fascinating Agatha Christie. As I do this read through, I just keep getting reminded of how creative Agatha Christie was and how many unique plots and ways of telling a mystery that she has, that she invented. Like, none of her books really are the same. There's always something different, and this one is no different. So in this one we have Mr. Treves, who is a famous criminologist, and he had some thoughts about murders and how we should be looking at murders. The story opens with a prologue, and it's got a date on it, November 19th. And throughout the prologue, we have a date and then the events that take place. And then we start with the first chapter. I want to say part though, because there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's only 5, so they're bigger chunks. But the way she wrote the prologue completely fits in with this concept of Towards Zero, this theory that Mr. Treves has about murder. So I'm going to share that with you first. So Mr. Treves is 80 years old, and he is a specialist on criminology. Unthinking people said Mr. Treves ought to write his memoirs. Mr. Treves knew better. He knew that he knew too much. I like a good detective story, he said, but you know they begin in the wrong place. They begin with the murder. But the murder is the end. The story begins long before that, years before sometimes, with all the causes and events that bring certain people to a certain place at a certain time, on a certain day, all converging toward a given spot. And then when the time comes, over the top, 0 hour. Yes, all of them converging towards zero. He said that on November the 19th. And then we are also introduced in the prologue to someone called Andrew McWhirter. And in this quote, a nun is talking to him while he's in hospital. And she says, "It may be just by being somewhere, not doing anything, just by being at a certain place at a certain time. Oh, I can't say what I mean, but you just might just walk along a street someday, and just by doing that accomplish something terribly important, perhaps without even knowing what it was." So then we have Superintendent Battle, and this is one of the books where he shows up right from the beginning, and so I appreciate that because we don't always get that in Superintendent Battle books. He first appears on page 12. It's March the 8th. Now, I had a thought as I was reading this book and thinking about the other books that Superintendent Battle was in and the role that he had. So in the last book that he appeared in, Murder is Easy, he doesn't show up until the very end of the book. The actual detective in that story is someone else entirely, but Superintendent Battle was needed in order to do stuff that only police can do, like arrest the suspect. So here was my thought. I'm thinking that it could be argued that Superintendent Battle is one of Agatha Christie's cardboard cutout detectives that she used when she didn't want the detective to detract from the story. Poirot and Marple are so distinct and have such a specific investigative style. Certain stories need them. So imagine the Orient Express with Marple, for example, or even Superintendent Battle. So if you really think about it, the stories that Poirot are in suit Poirot, right? They need the Poirot style of investigation. When she didn't want the detective to distract from the story, she used a cutout detective. So that's why this story is perfect for Superintendent Battle. That's just a thought that I had. If you've read a number of the Superintendent Battle books, or if you have read a number of Agatha Christie's, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this in the comment section down below. Do you agree with me that she had certain kind of like cookie cutter detectives that she could slip in when a specific detective wasn't needed? I hope I made myself clear with that. Okay, so in the prologue, we meet all the main players of the story, but it's all taking place on these different dates, and we're heading towards 0 hour, which I think is so clever of Agatha Christie. So we meet Neville and Kay Strange on April the 19th. We meet Lady Tressilian on April 30th, and the bulk of the story takes place at her house. That same date, we also meet Mary Alden. We meet Audrey Strange on May the 5th, and Audrey is Neville's ex-wife. We meet Thomas Royd on May the 29th. Mr. Treves shows up again in the prologue on June the 15th. We meet Ted Latimer on July the 28th, and then Superintendent Battle shows up again on August the 10th. And they are all converging on 0 hour. I just think it is so clever. It's a really clever way of telling the story. So the main action of the stories takes place at Gull's Point in Cornwall. And that is not far from St. Lou. And St. Lou, you may know if you read Peril at End House or Evil Under the Sun. So this is all stuff from the Agatha Christie universe that I think is really interesting. Evil Under the Sun and Peril at End House were Poirot stories. So I think that is further proof that Poirot and Superintendent Battle live in the same world. Yeah, I just think that's great. And again, further proof of that is this little conversation that Superintendent Battle has, and he's talking to one of his officers here, and he says, "I wish I knew what keeps putting Hercule Poirot into my head." "You mean that old chap, the Belgian, comic little guy?" "Comic my foot," said Superintendent Battle. "About as dangerous as a black mamba and a she-leopard. That's what he is when he starts making a mountebank of himself. I wish he were here. This sort of thing would be right up his street." "In what way?" "Psychology," said Battle. "Real psychology, not the half-baked stuff people hand out who know nothing about it. No, the real genuine article, knowing just what makes the wheels go round. Keep a murderer talking. That's one of his lines. Says everyone is bound to speak what's true sooner or later, because in the end it's easier than telling lies. And so they make some little slip they don't know that they don't think matter. And that's when you get there. But what's really worrying me is what put Hercule Poirot into my head. Upstairs, that's where it was. Now, what did I see that reminded me of that little guy? I thought that was great. And then one more quote, and again, this is not spoilery, but it's Superintendent Battle. And he is recounting something that he had heard from Mr. Daniels, who is a King's Counsel, a lawyer, who knows Mr. Treves. When you read an account of a murder, or say a fiction story based on murder, you usually begin with the murder itself. That's all wrong. The murder begins a long time beforehand. A murder is the culmination of a lot of different circumstances, all converging at a given moment, at a given point. The murder itself is the end of the story. It's 0 hour. All right, so let's get into a few spoilery things then about Towards Zero. So I'm going to put spoiler across the screen here for you. This was from the prologue, but I didn't want to share it earlier just in case. Everyone has a slightly different idea of what's spoilery. So in the prologue on February 14th, we get this. There was no one to read the words that were being traced. If there had been, they would hardly have believed their eyes. For what was being written was a clear, carefully detailed project for murder. So we know, even right from the prologue, that someone is meticulously planning a murder, which I find, which is great, right? And then we have, kind of in the middle of the story, we have Mr. Treves. He tells a story of a child murderer. And he says that he would recognize them because of a certain physical peculiarity. So, because I was trying to figure out who the killer is, I started to pay attention. And I even went back to, because certain things came to mind. Each of the main, the main suspects, the main characters, most of them were given a peculiarity. So Mary Alden, she had one lock of white hair. Thomas Royd, he had a right arm and shoulder partly helpless from an injury. Neville Strange had a short left hand little finger. And Audrey Strange had a scar from a dog bite on her left ear. And I'm sure that there was a couple that I missed there, but those were the ones that I picked out when I thought of that. So yeah, this one in the end wasn't necessarily, again, my favorite of the Agatha Christie books, but it was pretty good. I did really enjoy it. And I just thought the way that she told this story was just so clever. Okay, and so that is Superintendent Battle in Towards Zero. And then the last Agatha Christie that and I forgot to mention, I rated this one 23 out of 47. So I liked it a little bit better than The Moving Finger. I just thought it was really clever the way she put that story together. And the last one that I want to talk about is Death Comes as the End. This is from 1944, and I really enjoyed this one. This is the only historical mystery that Agatha Christie wrote. This one is set in Egypt in 2000 BC. So that is fantastic. There is an author's note at the beginning, which is really helpful. She talks about the setting and the time period, Thebes, 2000 BC. And then she also talks about some terminology that was common at the time. The terms brother, sister in Egyptian text, regularly meaning lover, are frequently interchangeable with husband, wife. They are so used on occasion in this book. And she totally needed to let us know that, but also that's a little bit alarming, right? Okay. So this is all set in one household. So we get this guy who is a Ka priest. He is a priest, he's a mortuary priest, and his family. So his mother, his children, his sons and their wives, and his widowed daughter who has come back home to live with her child, his business manager, excuse me, one of their servants, and what causes the conflict in this story is the concubine that he brings home. So these are the main characters in the story. I really liked this one. I liked being in ancient Egypt. I liked the setting. But when I took a step back, I realized that at its core, this is just a closed circle country house mystery. So if you are not sure that you like historical mysteries, and so maybe you'll give this one a pass, read it anyway, because if you enjoy closed circle mysteries, if you enjoy country house mysteries, then think of it that way, and I think that you'll really like it, because all of the action takes place on this guy's property. So here's a quote for you, a couple quotes. Sorry, just the one. Hori sighed. Then he said gently, "You do not understand, Reneseb. There is an evil that comes from outside, that attacks so that all the world can see. But there is another kind of rottenness that breeds from within, that shows no outward sign. It grows slowly, day by day, till at last the whole fruit is rotten, eaten by disease." Yeah, I liked that. Okay, so I'm going to put spoiler across the screen now so that I don't accidentally say something spoilery as I talk about this book. So, as I said before, the guy brings home this concubine, and it starts to cause all kinds of conflict in the house. And so, I guess, unsurprisingly, the concubine turns up dead. She's fallen from a cliff, and it's unclear if she was pushed, if she jumped, if she just fell. And so they decided, they looked into it a little bit and kind of came to the conclusion that she just fell. And then some time passes, and another member of the household dies. The oldest son's wife dies. And then more people start to die. And so what's great is we get some superstition and some beliefs of the time. So a lot of the family believes that it's the concubine, and what was her name again? Nefrit, I think. Nefrit. They think that it's her, coming back and killing off anybody who angered her, essentially. So yeah, I thought that was it was good to get that into the story. And then more and more people start to die. And so the question then becomes, what's going on? Where is the real murder? Did the murder first start with Nefrit, or was it someone else? And so again, as I was reading this, I went into this one completely blind, which is rare for me. I've never read this one before. I hadn't had it spoiled by anybody, and there are no adaptations, so I've never even seen an adaptation. So I was reading this one totally like looking for the clues, trying to figure out who the killer was. And what was really getting me was the motive. Like, you needed to know what's the motive here in order to figure it out. And I made this note. To know that, you need to answer the big question: was Nefrit murdered? If so, was it Satipi, who is the first person who was killed a little while later? Where does murder actually start? Because if Nefrit was just an accident, then the murder starts with Satipi. So that was kind of my struggle, was trying to figure that one out. I really did enjoy this. I thought this was clever and really fun, and I rated it at 17 out of 47. So there you go. Those are the 3 books by Agatha Christie that I read recently that I wanted to talk about. Have you read any of these 3 books? I would love to chat with you in the comment section down below. One is a standalone, one is a Marple, and one is a superintendent battle. So let me know in the comment section down below if you have a favorite Agatha Christie detective. And also let me know, do you prefer her standalone books or her series detective books? I would love to know that as well. And I will see you for another video soon. Bye.